If you've climbed the ladder, earned the title, collected the accolades, but still feel empty when you look in the mirror, you're not broken. You're waking up. This isn't a midlife crisis. It's a midlife reckoning. Most people spend their 40s defending the identity they built in their 20s and 30s. They cling to outdated versions of success. They keep playing a game they've already won, wondering why the trophy feels hollow. But you're starting to ask different questions. Not how do I achieve more, but who am I beyond what I've achieved? That question terrifies most people, because answering it means dismantling everything you thought defined you. This isn't about fixing your career. It's about rebuilding your identity from the ground up. About discovering that achievement was never supposed to complete you. It was supposed to teach you that completion comes from somewhere deeper. The person you were at 25 is not the person you need to be at 45. And trying to force that old identity to fit your current life is like trying to squeeze into clothes from 2 decades ago. So let's talk about what happens when achievement isn't enough. And more importantly, what comes next. Chapter 1. Recognize when success becomes your prison. You hit the goals. You earned the respect. You built the life everyone said you should want. So why does it feel like you're suffocating? Most people never ask this question because they're too busy protecting their image. They've invested decades building a reputation, a title, a position. To question it now feels like betraying everything they worked for. But here's what nobody tells you about achievement in your 40s. The same identity that got you here can become the cage that keeps you trapped. You're not the hungry 28-year-old anymore. You're not driven by the same fears, the same needs to prove yourself. But you're still operating from that old playbook because it's the only one you know. Think about it. How much of your current drive comes from genuine desire versus habit? How much of your identity is built on who you actually are versus who you needed to be to survive your 30s? The truth is uncomfortable. You've been successful by conventional measures. But conventional success was designed for someone else's definition of a meaningful life, not yours. Achievement becomes a prison when you realize you've been climbing a ladder leaned against the wrong wall. When every promotion feels more like a burden than a victory. When the title that once excited you now feels like a costume you can't take off. You see it in the mirror. The fatigue that sleep can't fix. The restlessness that vacation can't cure. The nagging sense that you're living someone else's dream and calling it your own. Most people at this crossroads do one of 2 things. They either double down, chase bigger titles, more money, greater external validation, hoping that more of what didn't fulfill them will somehow become fulfilling. Or they collapse, quit everything, blow up their life, and wonder why the rubble still feels empty. Both responses miss the point. The issue isn't your achievements. It's your attachment to an identity that's built entirely on them. You've confused what you do with who you are. And when what you do stops feeling meaningful, you feel like you're disappearing. But you're not disappearing. You're emerging. This discomfort, it's your true self trying to get your attention. It's been buried under decades of performance, of proving, of achieving, and now it's loud enough that you can't ignore it anymore. The people around you won't understand this. Your peers are still playing the old game. Your family sees your success and wonders why you're not grateful. They don't see what you feel, that you've been successful at building a life that no longer fits who you're becoming. So they'll tell you to be reasonable. to appreciate what you have, to stop being ungrateful. Ignore them. This isn't ingratitude. It's growth. And growth always looks reckless to people who stopped growing. Your 40s are not about maintaining what you built. They're about questioning it. About examining every assumption you made when you were younger and asking, does this still serve me? Does this reflect who I am now? Or am I just going through motions because I'm afraid to admit I've outgrown this version of success? The moment you recognize your success has become your prison, you have two choices. You can keep pretending the cage is freedom, or you can start looking for the key. That key, it's buried under layers of identity you need to peel away. Under the titles, the roles, the expectations. Under the person you became to survive. Underneath all of that is someone you haven't met in a long time, maybe ever. And meeting that person, the real you, not the achieved you, that's what this rebuilding is about. So stop defending the prison. Stop making excuses for why the cage is actually comfortable. Stop pretending that one more achievement will make this feeling go away. It won't. The only thing that will change this is you. Recognizing that the identity you've been living is too small for who you're becoming. That success without alignment is just sophisticated misery. Chapter 2. Understand why your old identity is crumbling. Chapter 2. Understand why your old identity is crumbling. Your identity isn't breaking down because something's wrong with you. It's breaking down because it was never meant to last forever. Most people build their identity in their 20s and early 30s based on one driving force. Survival. You needed it to prove yourself. To establish credibility. To build security. To earn respect in a world that didn't automatically give it to you. So you created a version of yourself designed to succeed in that environment. Ambitious. Driven. Resilient. That's what you said. Willing to sacrifice. For validation. And it worked. That identity got you here. But here's what nobody warns you about. The identity that gets you to success is rarely the identity that helps you find meaning in it. You built yourself to achieve, not to reflect, not to question, not to explore what truly matters beyond the next goal. You optimize for performance, not for fulfillment. And now you're paying the price. Your old identity is crumbling because it was constructed on foundations that no longer exist. The fears that motivated you at 25 aren't the same at 45. The need to prove yourself has faded. The external validation you once craved feels hollow now. You've reached a point where achievement no longer scratches the itch, where success feels empty because you don't know who you are without it. Think about the person you were when you started climbing. What drove you? Was it genuine passion? Or was it fear? Fear of failure, of inadequacy, of being overlooked? For most people, it's fear. That fear became fuel. It pushed you through the long hours, the setbacks, the moments when you wanted to quit. It gave you a clear enemy. Failure. And a clear mission, prove you belong. But fear-based identity has an expiration date. Once you've proven yourself, once you've achieved enough to feel secure, that fear loses its power. And with it goes the identity it supported. That's what's happening now. The scaffolding is falling away. The fear that held you together is gone. And you're left standing in the rubble, wondering who you are without it. Most people panic at this stage. They try to manufacture new fears to drive them. They chase bigger goals not because they want them, but because they need the familiar feeling of striving. They create artificial urgency to avoid facing the real question: who am I when I'm not achieving? But that panic is a trap. Because the answer to that question isn't found in more achievement. It's found in the space between. In the stillness you've been avoiding. In the silence that achievement has been drowning out. Your old identity is also crumbling because it was built for external validation. You learned early that success meant approval. That achievement earned love, respect, recognition. So you optimized for what others valued, not what you valued. You became who they needed you to be. The reliable one. The successful one. The one who had it all together. But living for external validation is exhausting. It's a game you can never win because the rules keep changing. Because there's always someone else to impress, some new standard to meet, some higher bar to clear. And at some point, usually in your 40s, you realize you don't care anymore. You don't want to impress them. You want to know yourself. You want to live from the inside out, not the outside in. That shift is what's making your old identity crumble. It's not built for internal validation. It doesn't know how to function without an audience. There's another reason too. Your old identity was narrow. It defined you by what you did, not by who you were. Professional total, the parent, touched, provider, spots. I achiever. These are roles, not a complete self. When you're young, that narrowness feels like focus. It helps you excel in specific areas. But as you age, it becomes suffocating. Because you're more than your job title. More than your accomplishments. More than the roles you play for others. And your soul knows it. That's why you feel restless. Why nothing seems to satisfy anymore. Why achievement feels hollow. Your soul is demanding more. It's demanding complexity, depth, integration. It's demanding that you become whole, not just successful. The identity crumbling isn't a crisis. It's an invitation. An invitation to rebuild based on truth instead of fear. Based on what you value instead of what others applaud. Based on who you actually are instead of who you thought you needed to be. But accepting that invitation means letting go. And letting go feels like dying when you spent decades building. Here's what you need to understand. The crumbling is necessary. You can't build a new foundation on top of an old one that's rotting. You have to let it fall. You have to sit in the discomfort of not knowing who you are for a while. Most people can't tolerate that discomfort. So they rush to rebuild the same identity with slightly different decoration. They change jobs but keep the same relationship to achievement. They talk about balance but continue measuring their worth by productivity. Don't do that. Don't waste this moment by rushing back to familiar ground. The crumbling is doing you a favor. It's stripping away everything that isn't essential. Everything that isn't really you. And yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it's scary. But it's also the only path to discovering who you are beneath all the achievement. Let it crumble. Let the old identity fall away. Trust what remains. The part that can't be taken away by job loss, by aging, by failure. That's the real you. That's what you're rebuilding from. Chapter 3. Accept that you don't know yourself anymore. Chapter 3. Accept that you don't know yourself anymore. The hardest truth in your 40s career crisis isn't that you're lost. It's that you never really knew yourself in the first place. You knew the performer, the achiever, the person who shows up, delivers, excels. But the person underneath, the one with needs, desires, fears that have nothing to do with productivity, you've been too busy to meet them. And now that person is demanding your attention. Most people resist this realization. They insist they know themselves. They'll point to their values, their principles, their track record. But those aren't self-knowledge. Those are the marketing materials you created to navigate the world. Real self-knowledge is messier. It includes the contradictions you've ignored, the desires you've suppressed because they didn't fit your image, the parts of yourself you've exiled because they weren't useful for achievement. You don't know yourself anymore because the version you've been living is a curated highlight reel, not the full story. Think about the last time you did something just because you wanted to, with no thought to how it would look, what it would achieve, whether it was productive. Can you even remember? Or have you been performing so long that desire itself has become another metric, another way to measure whether you're doing life right? That's what happens when you build your identity around achievement. You lose touch with the raw, unedited you. The one who wants things for no good reason, who's curious about paths that lead nowhere useful, who feels things that don't make strategic sense. That person, the real you, has been buried under decades of optimization. And now they're clawing their way to the surface. Accepting that you don't know yourself isn't giving up. It's the most honest thing you can do. It's saying, I've been playing a character. I've been so focused on succeeding that I forgot to check if this success reflects who I actually am. And that admission opens space. Space to explore. Space to question. Space to discover that maybe you're interested in things you never allowed yourself to pursue because they didn't fit the plan. But here's where most people get stuck. They think self-knowledge means finding their true passion or their authentic self, as if it's buried treasure waiting to be discovered. It's not. You don't find yourself. You construct yourself. Day by day, choice by choice, through the process of living honestly and paying attention. The you that exists right now is a starting point, not a destination. And that you is probably different from who you thought you were because you've been too busy achieving to notice who you're becoming. Maybe you're not as driven as you used to be. Maybe you're more interested in depth than breadth. Maybe you care less about what others think and more about how you feel at the end of the day. These changes aren't failures. They're growth. But they feel like failure when you're attached to an old identity that prized drive, expansion, and external validation above all else. So you resist. You tell yourself you're just tired, just burned out, just needing a break. You convince yourself that once you rest, you'll get back to being the person you were. But you won't. Because you can't go backward. You can only go forward into unknown territory. And forward means accepting that the person you were is not the person you're becoming. That the identity you built was necessary then, but insufficient now. This acceptance isn't resignation. It's liberation. It's releasing yourself from the exhausting job of maintaining a self that no longer fits. Of pretending you're still motivated by things that bore you. Of faking enthusiasm for a path you've outgrown. When you accept that you don't know yourself, you stop defending an outdated identity. You stop making decisions based on who you used to be or who you thought you should become. Instead, you start paying attention to who you actually are right now. What genuinely interests you, not what should interest you. What energizes you, not what you think should energize you. What feels true, not what feels impressive. This process is uncomfortable because it requires honesty you've been avoiding. It requires admitting that maybe the life you built is beautiful but wrong. That maybe you've been successful at creating something that doesn't match who you are. That's a painful admission, especially when people around you see your success and can't understand your dissatisfaction. But their understanding isn't required. Your honesty is. You need to be willing to say, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what I want. I don't know where I'm going. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise just to maintain an image. That vulnerability is where rebuilding begins. Not in having answers. Not in having a plan. Not in knowing the next step. But in admitting you're in the dark and you're willing to stay there long enough to let your eyes adjust. Most people can't do this. They panic in the not knowing. They grab for anything familiar, another job, another goal, another achievement, just to feel like they're moving forward. But movement isn't progress when you don't know where you're going. It's just motion. And motion without direction is exhaustion disguised as productivity. So stop moving for a moment. Stop trying to figure it out. Stop treating your identity crisis like a problem to solve and start treating it like an opening to explore. You don't know yourself anymore? Good. That means you're not trapped in an old story. You have room to discover who you're becoming. That discovery won't happen in your head. It will happen in your choices, in the small daily decisions you make when no one's watching, in what you say yes to and what you finally have the courage to say no to. It will happen when you stop asking, what will this achieve? And start asking, what does this reveal about who I am? Every choice is data. Every decision is information. And when you pay attention, really pay attention, you'll start to see patterns. Patterns that reveal someone you might not have expected. Someone more complex, more contradictory, more interesting than the polished professional you've been presenting to the world. That's who you're getting to know. Not the achiever. The human. Chapter 4. Stop confusing your career with your identity. Chapter 4. Stop confusing your career with your identity. You are not your job title. But you've been acting like you are for so long that the line between the two has disappeared. When someone asks, what do? You answer with your profession. When you introduce yourself, you lead with your role. When you think about your worth, you measure it by your career success. This conflation is killing you. Because your career is something you do. Your identity is who you are. And when you merge the two, your entire sense of self becomes dependent on something external, unstable, and ultimately beyond your control. Most people don't realize they've made this mistake until something happens. A layoff, a career plateau, a realization that climbing higher doesn't feel like winning anymore. Suddenly, the foundation they built their identity on cracks, and they don't know who they are without it. You might be experiencing that right now. The job that once defined you feels constraining. The title that once excited you feels empty. The career path that once seemed so clear now feels like it's leading nowhere you want to go. And with that shift comes a terrifying question. If I'm not this executive, this professional, this expert, then who am I? That question only terrifies you because you've spent decades answering it with your career. You let your profession become shorthand for your personality. Your achievements become proof of your value. Your productivity become evidence of your worth. But here's the brutal truth. Your company doesn't care who you are. Your industry doesn't care who you are. Your job title doesn't care who you are. They care what you produce, what you deliver, what value you add. The moment you stop producing, they'll replace you without a second thought. Not because they're cruel, because that's how it works. Your career is a transaction. You trade time, skill, and energy for money, status, and resources. It's a valuable transaction, but it's not an identity. You want to know the difference? Your identity can't be taken away. It doesn't depend on someone else's approval. It doesn't fluctuate with market conditions or company restructures or industry trends. Your career, all of those things affect it. Which means if your career is your identity, you're building yourself on sand. Think about how much of your self-worth is tied to your last performance review. How much of your confidence is tied to your professional reputation? How much of your security is tied to your current position? Now, imagine all of that disappears tomorrow. Who are you then? If you can't answer that question without mentioning your job, you have a problem. Not a career problem, an identity problem. The reason you've conflated the two is understandable. Society rewards it. From childhood, you're asked what you want to be when you grow up. Not who you want to be, but what. The message is clear. Your value comes from your role. Then you spend your 20s and 30s building that role. You sacrifice time, relationships, health to climb the ladder. And every rung you climb, you think you're becoming more yourself. But you're not. You're becoming more successful at playing a role. There's a difference. Playing a role successfully can feel like identity because it gives you clear feedback. You know if you're doing it right. You get promoted or you don't. You get praised or criticized. You advance or plateau. That clarity is addictive. It makes you feel like you know who you are because you know how you're performing. But performance isn't identity. It's just performance. Real identity is who you are when there's no audience. When there's no metric. When there's no reward for being anything other than yourself. That person, you probably don't know them very well. Because you've been too busy performing to pay attention. So how do you separate your career from your identity? You start by recognizing that your career is one dimension of your life, not the entirety of it. It's important. It matters. But it's not all of who you are. You are also the person who feels things, who loves people, who has interests outside of work, who has a history, a story, a set of experiences that shaped you long before you had a job title. But when was the last time you paid attention to those parts of yourself? When was the last time you pursued an interest just because it interested you, not because it would advance your career or look good on your resume? When was the last time you had a conversation where you didn't mention what you do for work? Where your value didn't come from your professional achievements? If you can't remember, you've been living as your career, not as yourself. And the cost of that is showing up now. In the restlessness. In the emptiness. In the sense that no matter how much you achieve, it's never enough. It's never enough because achievement can't fulfill you. Only authentic living can do that. And authentic living requires knowing yourself beyond your productivity. Here's what needs to happen. You need to build parts of your life that have nothing to do with your career. Not networking activities disguised as hobbies. Not personal brand building disguised as self-expression. Actual parts of yourself that exist independently of your professional success. Maybe it's creativity. Maybe it's physical pursuits. Maybe it's relationships. Maybe it's learning something for no practical reason, except that it fascinates you. Whatever it is, it needs to be something where your job title doesn't matter, where your professional reputation is irrelevant, where you're just a human being exploring something that feels alive. This terrifies overachievers because it feels like wasting time, like regressing, like being less than you're capable of. But it's not. It's becoming more than what you've been, more dimensional, more complex, more whole. Your career gave you one version of power, the power to achieve, to produce, to succeed in measurable ways. That power is real, but it's narrow. The power of knowing yourself beyond your career is different. It's the power to be stable when your job changes, to find meaning when achievement stops satisfying, to have an identity that can't be downsized, restructured, or made obsolete. That's the power you need in your 40s. Not more career success. More self-knowledge. So start untangling. Start building an identity that exists whether you're employed or not, whether you're successful or not, whether you're climbing or coasting. Build yourself based on values, not achievements. Based on who you want to be, not what you want to accomplish. Based on what matters to you when no one's watching. That's your real identity. Everything else is just a role you play. Chapter 5. Let go of who you thought you'd be by now. Chapter 5. Let go of who you thought you'd be by now. You had a vision. By 40, you'd be here. By 45, you'd have this. By 50, you'd feel that way. None of it turned out like you planned. And that gap between expectation and reality is eating you alive. You thought you'd feel more settled, more certain, more satisfied with what you'd built. Instead, you feel like you're starting over, like you wasted time, like you missed the window to become who you were supposed to be. But here's what you need to understand. The person you thought you'd be by now was a fantasy. Not because you didn't try hard enough. Because that person was based on limited information and outdated assumptions. You created that vision when you were younger. When you didn't yet know what actually fulfills you. When you thought achievement would satisfy you in ways it doesn't. When you believed the story society tells about what a successful 40-something should look like. That vision was never realistic. It was aspirational. And aspiration, while useful for motivation, makes a terrible measuring stick for self-worth. Yet that's exactly how you're using it. You're measuring your current self against an imaginary future self and finding yourself lacking. You're treating a fantasy as a standard, and then feeling like a failure for not meeting it. This is self-inflicted suffering, and it's blocking you from seeing who you actually are and what you actually want now. The version of success you imagined at 25 is not the version that would satisfy you at 45, because you're not the same person. Your priorities have shifted. Your values have deepened. Your understanding of what matters has evolved. But you're still chasing goals set by someone you no longer are. Goals that made sense then but feel empty now. And you're wondering why crossing them off doesn't bring the relief you expected. It's because they were never your goals. They were your past self's goals. And your past self, while well-intentioned, didn't know what they couldn't know. How you'd change, what you'd learn, who you'd become. So let them go. Let go of the timeline. Let go of the benchmarks. Let go of the person you thought you'd be and make space for the person you actually are. This isn't lowering your standards. It's changing them. It's recognizing that the standards you set when you were younger were based on external measures of success, not internal measures of fulfillment. You should have this title by now, but maybe that title would have required you to become someone you don't want to be. You thought you'd have that level of income, but maybe that income would have required sacrifices you're no longer willing to make. You thought you'd feel more accomplished. But maybe accomplishment isn't what you actually need. Maybe what you need is alignment, connection, purpose. Things that can't be measured by the metrics you were using. The person you are now, flawed, uncertain, in transition, is more real than the fantasy version you were chasing. And that real person deserves your attention, your compassion, your curiosity, not your judgment. Most people can't let go of who they thought they'd be because it feels like admitting defeat, like conceding they weren't good enough, like accepting less than they deserved. But it's not. It's accepting reality. And reality, when you stop fighting it, is actually more interesting than fantasy. The reality is, you're here. You made choices. Some worked out, some didn't. Some doors opened, others closed. You've gained things you didn't expect and lost things you thought you'd keep. You've become someone you didn't predict. All of that is information. All of that shaped you. And fighting it, wishing you were different, regretting past decisions, mourning the life you didn't live, that's just wasting energy you could be using to build something real now. You want to know what's holding you back from rebuilding your identity? It's not your circumstances. It's your attachment to an outdated vision of who you should be. That vision is a ghost. It haunts you, making you feel inadequate, making you second-guess every choice that deviated from the plan. But ghosts aren't real. They're just stories you keep telling yourself. So stop telling that story. Stop comparing yourself to a person who never existed. Stop measuring your worth against arbitrary milestones that someone else convinced you mattered. Start asking different questions. Not why am I not there yet, but where am I actually trying to go? Not what did I fail to achieve, but what do I actually want to create from here? These questions don't have clean answers. They don't fit on a vision board. They don't give you a clear roadmap, but they're honest. And honest questions lead to real growth, not performative achievement. Letting go means accepting that life is not linear, that you don't fail by not arriving at a predetermined destination. That sometimes the detours teach you more than the planned route ever would have. It means recognizing that who you are now, complex, contradictory, still figuring it out, is not a problem to fix. It's a human being in process, and process doesn't have a deadline. You're not running out of time. You're just operating on a different timeline than you expected. And that's okay. That's actually more than okay. That's real. The pressure you feel to be further along isn't coming from reality. It's coming from comparison, to peers who seem to have it figured out, to social media highlight reels, to an imaginary standard that doesn't account for the full complexity of your actual life. But you don't know what they sacrificed to get where they are. You don't know what they're struggling with behind closed doors. You don't know if they even like the life they built, or if they're just better at pretending. So stop comparing. Stop measuring. Stop judging yourself against a fantasy. Let go of who you thought you'd be. Not because you failed, but because holding on to that ghost is preventing you from meeting who you actually are. And who you actually are, that person is worth knowing, worth building a life around, worth giving space and time and attention to. That person doesn't need to prove anything, doesn't need to catch up to some imaginary timeline, doesn't need to become someone else to be valuable. That person just needs to be seen, honestly, without the filter of expectation or the distortion of regret. So, look at yourself clearly. Who are you right now? Not who you wish you were. Not who you thought you'd be. Who you actually are, standing in this moment, with this history, with these stars and wisdom and uncertainties. That's your starting point. Not your failure. Your foundation. Chapter 6. Build identity around values, not achievements. Chapter 6. Build identity around values, not achievements. Achievements fade. Titles change. Success is temporary. But values last. And that's what you need to rebuild on. You've spent decades building an identity around what you've done. The promotions, the projects, the wins. Every achievement added another brick to the structure you call yourself. But that structure is unstable. Because achievements are external. They depend on circumstances, opportunities, other people's decisions. They can be taken away. And when they are, if that's all you built on, you collapse. Values are different. Values are internal. They're the principles that guide your choices, the standards you hold yourself to, the things that matter to you regardless of outcome. You can't lose your values unless you abandon them. And when your identity is built on values instead of achievements, you become unshakable. Most people resist this shift because values feel abstract compared to achievements. Achievements are concrete. You can point to them. You can measure them. You can prove them to others. Values are quieter. They don't announce themselves. They don't impress people at networking events. They don't fit neatly on a resume. But they do something achievements can't. They tell you who you are in every situation, not just when you're winning. Think about it. Your achievements tell a story about what you've done. Your values tell a story about who you are. And in your 40s, when the doing starts to feel hollow, the being becomes essential. So what are your actual values? Not the ones you list on your LinkedIn profile. Not the ones your company posts on the wall. The real ones. The ones that show up in your choices when nobody's watching. You might not know, because you've been so focused on achieving that you haven't stopped to define what matters beyond achievement. Here's how to find out. Look at your decisions over the past 5 years. Not what you said was important. What you actually prioritized. Where you actually spent your time and energy. Those patterns reveal your operating values. And they might not match what you think your values are. Maybe you say family is important, but you've consistently chosen work over presence. Maybe you say health matters, but you've sacrificed it for productivity. Maybe you say authenticity is key, but you've been performing for so long, you've forgotten what genuine feels like. Those gaps between stated values and actual behavior, that's where the identity crisis lives. Because you're not living in alignment. You're living in performance. And performance exhausts you. Rebuilding identity around values means closing those gaps. It means defining what actually matters to you, not what should matter, not what looks good, and then organizing your life around it. This sounds simple. It's not. Because living by your values often means making choices that don't optimize for achievement. It means saying no to opportunities that would advance your career but violate your principles. It means choosing depth over breadth. It means prioritizing how you want to feel over how you want to look. And that's terrifying for someone whose identity has been built on achievement, because it feels like giving up, like settling, like becoming less ambitious. But it's not. It's becoming more integrated, more whole, more yourself. Values-based identity doesn't mean abandoning ambition. It means filtering ambition through what matters. It means asking not just, can I do this, but should I do this based on who I want to be? Let me give you examples of what this looks like. If integrity is your core value, your identity becomes someone who keeps their word regardless of whether anyone notices. You don't lie on your resume, even if it would land the job. You don't take credit for others' work, even if no one would know. Not because it's strategic, because it's who you are. If connection is your core value, your identity becomes someone who prioritizes relationships. You don't skip your kid's event for a meeting. You don't network transactionally. You invest in depth, not breadth, even when breadth looks more impressive. If growth is your core value, your identity becomes someone who embraces challenge. You take risks that might not pan out. You admit when you're wrong. You ask for feedback even when it's uncomfortable. Because growing matters more than looking good. See the difference? Achievement-based identity asks, what will this get me? Values-based identity asks, who will this make me? The first is externally motivated. The second is internally anchored. And internal anchoring is what you desperately need right now. When you build on values, failure doesn't destroy you. Because failure is just data, not identity. You can lose a job and still be someone who acts with integrity. You can miss a goal and still be someone who prioritizes connection. You can have a bad quarter and still be someone committed to growth. Your worth doesn't fluctuate with your results. It remains stable because it's based on something you control. Your choices, your character, your consistency with your principles. This is the foundation that achievement never gave you. The foundation that makes you resilient. That lets you navigate uncertainty without losing yourself. That allows you to evolve without falling apart. But building this foundation requires honesty. You have to identify your actual values, not the ones you wish you had. You have to acknowledge where you've been living out of alignment. You have to make different choices going forward. And those choices will cost you. They'll cost you opportunities that don't align. Relationships that were based on your old identity. Status that came from performing rather than being. But what you gain is something achievement never gave you. Peace, clarity. A sense of self that doesn't depend on external validation. You gain the ability to look in the mirror and recognize the person looking back. Not the professional persona. Not the curated image. The actual human being whose choices reflect their stated beliefs. That alignment, that's what fulfillment actually is. Not achieving more. Not having more. But being who you say you are consistently across all contexts. Most people never experience this. They spend their entire lives chasing achievements while their values sit in the background, ignored and unexamined. Then they wonder why success feels hollow. You don't have to be most people. You can choose differently. Starting now. Define your values. Not in abstract terms, but in behavioral terms. Integrity isn't a value until you define what it means in practice. Does it mean keeping commitments? Speaking truth even when it's costly? Admitting mistakes publicly? Get specific. Because specificity turns values from nice ideas into lived reality. Then audit your life against those values. Where are you aligned? Where are you compromising? Where are you living for achievement at the expense of your principles? Those compromises, they're where the emptiness comes from. They're why you feel disconnected from yourself. Because you're betraying your own values in service of someone else's definition of success. And you can't keep doing that. Not if you want to rebuild an identity that actually fits who you are. So start making different choices. Small ones at first. Say no to something that would look good but feels wrong. Say yes to something that aligns with your values, even if it doesn't advance your career. Notice how those choices feel, not in terms of outcome, but in terms of integrity. Do you feel more like yourself? More at peace? More connected to who you actually are? That feeling, that's your compass. That's how you know you're building in the right direction. Achievement pulls you forward. Values anchor you in yourself. And after decades of being pulled forward, you need that anchor. You need to know who you are when you're not achieving. Who you are when no one's watching. Who you are when the applause stops. That person, the one revealed by your values, not your accomplishments, that's who you're rebuilding around. Not because achievements don't matter. They do. But they matter as expressions of your values, not as replacements for identity. When you build this way, work becomes different. It's no longer about proving your worth. It's about expressing your values through contribution. About using your skills in service of what matters to you. Relationships become different too. You stop networking and start connecting. You stop collecting contacts and start investing in people who share your values. Even your relationship with yourself changes. You stop evaluating yourself by metrics and start evaluating yourself by alignment. Am I living consistently with what I believe? Am I making choices that reflect who I want to be? Those questions ground you. They give you a standard that doesn't shift with market conditions or other people's opinions. They make you solid, stable, integrated. And that solidity, that's what you've been missing. That's what achievement couldn't provide. That's what you need to navigate the uncertainty of reinventing yourself in your 40s. So built on values. Not on achievements, not on what you've done or what you might do, but on who you are consistently, regardless of circumstances. That's the foundation that lasts. That's the identity that doesn't crumble when the external markers of success change. That's you. The real you. The one worth building a life around. Chapter 7. Embrace the discomfort of starting over. Chapter 7. Embrace the discomfort of starting over. You're 40-something. You've built a career. You've earned expertise. You established yourself. And now you're starting over. Again. Not from zero, but from unknown. And that feels worse. Because starting from zero is expected when you're young. But starting from unknown in your 40s? That feels like regression. Like failure. Like you should have figured this out by now. But here's what you need to understand. Starting over isn't going backward. It's going deeper. You're not erasing what you've built. You're excavating what's underneath. You're not losing ground. You're finding firmer ground to build on. But it doesn't feel that way. It feels disorienting, vulnerable, maybe embarrassing. You're supposed to be established at this age, certain, secure. Instead, you're questioning everything. You don't have clear answers. You can't project confidence about your direction, and that makes you feel like an imposter. Like everyone else has it figured out, and you're the only one floundering. They don't. They're just better at hiding it. The truth is, anyone who's still growing in their 40s goes through this. Anyone who refuses to stagnate, who won't settle for comfortable misery, who insists on alignment over achievement, they all face this discomfort. It's not a sign you're doing it wrong. It's a sign you're doing it at all. Most people avoid starting over by staying in careers that no longer fit. They endure the slow death of unfulfillment because it's familiar. Because it protects them from the vulnerability of not knowing. But you're here. You're willing to face the discomfort. And that takes more courage than most people will ever show. So let's talk about what this discomfort actually is and how to move through it without retreating back to what's familiar. First, understand that the discomfort has layers. The first layer is practical. You're letting go of certainty. You don't know exactly what you're building toward. You can't give people a clean answer about your 5-year plan. You can't defend your choices with airtight logic. This layer activates your fear of judgment. What will people think? What will they say when you can't explain your direction? How do you maintain credibility when you're uncertain? The second layer is psychological. Starting over means admitting your previous path wasn't complete. That you built something successful but insufficient. That you need something you don't have yet. This layer activates your fear of inadequacy. Maybe you're not as accomplished as you thought. Maybe you've been fooling yourself. Maybe you're not capable of rebuilding. The third layer is existential. Starting over means facing the reality that you don't get to know how it turns out before you commit. You have to move forward on faith, not certainty. On values, not guarantees. This layer activates your fear of meaninglessness. What if you rebuild and it still feels empty? What if there's no answer that satisfies you? What if this whole search is futile? All 3 layers hit at once. And they make you want to retreat. To go back to the safety of the known, even if the known was killing you slowly. Don't retreat. Here's how you move through the discomfort instead of around it. First, stop treating uncertainty as a problem. It's not a problem. It's a condition of growth. You can't grow into something you already know. You can only grow by moving toward what you don't know yet. Uncertainty means you're in motion. You're not stuck. You're not stagnant. You're in the messy middle where transformation actually happens. So instead of trying to eliminate the uncertainty, which you can't do, learn to function within it. Make decisions with incomplete information. Take action without perfect clarity. Built incrementally rather than waiting for the complete blueprint. This is a skill. And like any skill, it improves with practice. Second, redefine what starting over means. It doesn't mean starting from scratch. It means starting from deeper knowledge. You're bringing everything you learned in the first half of your career. The skills, the wisdom, the understanding of what matters and what doesn't. You're just applying it differently now. You're not a beginner. You're an expert who's choosing to be a beginner again in service of something more aligned. That's not regression. That's evolution. Third, embrace being bad at something again. You've been competent for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to struggle, to not know, to fail at something. But struggle is where growth lies. Comfort is where growth stops. So when you feel incompetent, when you don't have the answers, when you make mistakes, that's not evidence you're failing. That's evidence you're pushing beyond your current capacity. You're supposed to feel this way. It means you're at your edge, where learning happens. Most people in their 40s won't tolerate this feeling. They've spent too long being the expert. They can't handle being the student again. But you can. Because you understand that expertise in the wrong direction is just sophisticated suckness. Fourth, stop waiting for permission. You don't need anyone to validate your decision to start over. You don't need them to understand. You don't need them to approve. This is your life, your identity, your alignment. If you wait for permission, you'll wait forever. Because most people can't see what you see. They see the external success and wonder why you'd walk away from it. They don't feel the internal misalignment you're experiencing. So they'll tell you to be grateful, to stick it out, to stop being unrealistic. Ignore them. Not because they're wrong about what they see, but because they're not looking at what matters, your internal experience, your truth, your need for alignment. Only you can authorize this rebuilding. And you do that by deciding, by choosing to honor what you know, even when you can't explain it, by trusting your internal experience over external opinions. Fifth, build support, but choose it carefully. Not everyone can hold space for your uncertainty. Not everyone can tolerate your questions without trying to fix you. Find people who've been through their own reinvention, who understand that growth is messy, who won't rush you to have answers. Those people will remind you that this discomfort is temporary and necessary. They'll reflect back that you're not crazy, not lost, not failing. You're just in the middle of something that hasn't resolved yet. And sometimes that reminder is all you need to keep going. Finally, practice self-compassion. You're doing something difficult. You're choosing growth over comfort. You're prioritizing truth over image. That deserves recognition, not criticism. So stop beating yourself up for not having it all figured out. Stop comparing yourself to people who've chosen certainty over authenticity. Stop judging yourself for taking longer than you expected. You're rebuilding an identity in your 40s. That's not a quick process. It's not supposed to be. Give yourself time. Give yourself grace. Give yourself permission to not know while you're figuring it out. The discomfort you're feeling is not a sign you should stop. It's a sign you're alive. You're engaged. You're refusing to settle for a life that doesn't fit. That discomfort is temporary, but the identity you build through it, that lasts. So embrace it. Not because it feels good, because it's leading you somewhere real. Chapter 8. Create space for who you're becoming. Chapter 8. Create space for who you're becoming. You can't become someone new while living someone else's life. And that's exactly what you're doing. You're trying to transform while maintaining the same schedule, the same obligations, the same identity performance that exhausted you in the first place. It won't work. Rebuilding identity requires space. Actual, physical, temporal space where you're not performing, not producing, not proving anything to anyone. Space where you can think, feel, Feel. Explore. Question. Where you can hear yourself beneath all the noise. But you don't have that space. Because you've filled every hour, every commitment, every moment of stillness with activity, with achievement, with maintaining the image of having it all together. You have to create space. Deliberately, even when it feels irresponsible, even when it looks like you're doing less. Because doing less externally creates room for doing more internally. And internal work, the work of discovering who you're becoming, that's what matters now. Most people resist creating space because it feels like giving up. Like they're abandoning their responsibilities. Like they're being selfish. But you can't serve others from an empty self. You can't build something meaningful from exhaustion. You can't discover who you are when you're too busy being who everyone else needs you to be. So creating space isn't selfish. It's essential. Here's what that space looks like practically. It looks like saying no to opportunities that don't align, to obligations that drain you, to commitments you made when you were a different person with different priorities. Every no you say to something that doesn't serve you is a yes to something that might. It's creating room for what you don't know yet, but need to discover. This terrifies overachievers, because saying no feels like closing doors, like limiting possibilities, but like becoming less ambitious. But you don't need more possibilities. You need the right possibilities. And you can't recognize them when you're buried under obligations to things that stopped mattering. Space also looks like pausing, not quitting, not disappearing, just pausing long enough to assess. Maybe it's a sabbatical. Maybe it's reducing your hours. Maybe it's stepping back from a leadership role. Maybe it's just clearing your evenings instead of filling them with networking events that feel empty. Whatever form it takes, the pause gives you distance. Distance to see your life from outside the momentum. To ask if this is where you want to be going. Most people never pause. They go from one thing to the next without reflection. They're so busy moving forward that they never check if forward is the right direction. Don't be most people. Space also means protecting time for exploration. Not productive time. Not time that leads to measurable outcomes. Time where you're just being curious. Read books that have nothing to do with your profession. Have conversations that aren't networking. Try activities you're terrible at just to see how they feel. This feels wasteful when you're used to optimizing every hour. But it's not wasteful. It's research. You're researching yourself, finding out what calls to you when you're not trying to be impressive. Those discoveries, the things that capture your attention when there's no strategic reason, those are clues. Clues to who you're becoming. Clues to what wants to emerge from underneath all the achievement. Pay attention to them. Space also means tolerating emptiness. This is the hardest part for most people. When you clear your schedule, when you stop performing, when you create actual open time, there's a void. And that void is uncomfortable. Your instinct will be to fill it immediately with new projects, new goals, new distractions. Don't sit in the void. Let it be empty. Let yourself be bored. Let the discomfort of not producing, not achieving, not moving forward just exist. Because in that void, things surface. Thoughts you've been too busy to think. Feelings you've been too productive to feel. Desires you've been too practical to acknowledge. Those things rising from the emptiness, those are your truth. That's your real self trying to get your attention. But you'll never hear it if you don't stop talking, doing, achieving long enough to listen. Creating space also means renegotiating relationships. Some people in your life are attached to your old identity. They need you to stay the same because your sameness makes them comfortable. When you start changing, when you start questioning, when you start creating space, they'll resist. They'll try to pull you back. Not out of malice. Out of fear that if you change, they'll lose you. You might lose them. Not everyone can evolve with you. Not everyone wants to. And that's okay. Not every relationship is meant to last forever. Some people were there for a season, for a version of you that you've outgrown. Creating space means being okay with that. Being okay with disappointing people who expect you to stay the same. Being okay with losing connections that were based on your performance, not your person. Because the space you create isn't just for you. It's for the people who can meet you as you're becoming, not as you were. Now, here's what creating space doesn't mean. It doesn't mean abandoning all responsibility. It doesn't mean checking out of your life. It doesn't mean ignoring the people who depend on you. It means being more intentional about what you say yes to. It means honoring your commitments, but not adding new ones that don't align. It means being present for what matters while releasing what doesn't. That discernment, knowing what to keep and what to release, that only comes from having space to think clearly. So how do you start? You start small. You don't blow up your life. You don't make dramatic changes that destabilize everything. You start by creating 1 hour a week that's just yours. No agenda. No productivity. Just space. Then you protect that hour like it's sacred. Because it is. In that hour, you don't check email. You don't return calls. You don't catch up on work. You just be. Maybe you walk. Maybe you sit. Maybe you journal. Maybe you stare out a window and do nothing. Whatever you do it without purpose. Without trying to get somewhere. Without trying to figure anything out. You just create space. And you notice what shows up in it. Then gradually, you expand that space. 2 hours. A morning. A full day. Whatever you can carve out without destroying what's actually important. And in that expanding space, you'll start to notice things. Patterns. Trends. Interests. Truths you've been avoiding. Desires you've been suppressing. You'll start to see who you're becoming when you're not trying to be anyone. And that person? They need room to breathe. Room to grow. Room to exist without constantly justifying their worth through productivity. Creating space is how you give them that room. It's how you tell your emerging self that they matter, that they're worth your time and attention, that they don't have to earn the right to exist through achievement. That permission to exist without achieving, that's what you've been denying yourself. That's what's been suffocating you. So create the space. Not someday. Now. Even if it's small. Even if it feels irresponsible. Even if people don't understand. This is your life. Your identity. Your becoming. And it needs space to unfold. Chapter 9. Take action from your new foundation. Chapter 9. Take action from your new foundation. You've done the inner work. You've questioned. You've reflected. You've created space. Now what? Now you build. but not the way you built before. You don't go back to achievement-driven action. You don't return to the hustle that hollowed you out. You don't rebuild the same structure with different decoration. You take action from your new foundation. From values. From alignment. From knowing who you are beneath the performance. This is different. It feels different. It looks different. And most importantly, it requires a different relationship with action itself. Before, action was about proving, about advancing, about accumulating evidence of your worth. You did things to become more, to achieve more, to be seen as more. Now, action is about expressing, about aligning, about living out who you already are rather than trying to become someone else. That shift, from proving to expressing, that changes everything. When you act from your new foundation, you don't take every opportunity. You take aligned opportunities. You don't chase every door that opens. You walk through the ones that feel true. This looks like being less busy but more effective. Like doing less, but meaning more. Like moving slower, but with greater purpose. And it terrifies the part of you that still measures worth by productivity. That part will tell you you're not doing enough. That you're wasting your potential. That you're settling. That you should be hustling harder, achieving more, pushing further. Ignore that voice. It's your old identity trying to survive. It doesn't understand that more activity doesn't equal more meaning. Your new foundation knows better. It knows that aligned action, even when it's less frequent, less impressive, less externally rewarded, creates more fulfillment than misaligned achievement ever could. So what does aligned action look like? It starts with this question: does this choice reflect my values? Not, will this advance my career? Not, will this impress people? Not, will this make me more successful? But, does this align with who I am and who I'm becoming? If yes, you move forward. If no, you decline. Even if it looks like a great opportunity. Even if other people think you're crazy to pass it up. Because your foundation isn't built on opportunity. It's built on alignment. And opportunities that don't align are just sophisticated distractions. Aligned action also means starting small. You don't need a grand vision. You don't need a 5-year plan. You don't need certainty about the destination. You just need the next right step. The one that feels true today. The one that moves you slightly closer to alignment. Maybe that step is having a difficult conversation. Maybe it's exploring a new field. Maybe it's saying no to something you would have said yes to before. Maybe it's saying yes to something you would have dismissed as impractical. Whatever it is, you take it. Not because you know where it leads. Because it feels true right now. And then, you take the next step. And the next. Each one informed by values, not by strategy. Each one a small act of integrity, not a calculated move toward a predetermined goal. This incremental approach frustrates people who want transformation to be dramatic, who want a before and after story they can point to. But real transformation is accumulation. It's 1,000 small choices that reflect your truth. It's daily alignment compounding over time. It's not impressive in the moment, but it's powerful in the aggregate. Here's another element of aligned action. It requires saying no constantly. To things that would have excited you before. To opportunities that look good but feel wrong. to paths that would make sense to everyone except you. Every misaligned yes is a betrayal of your new foundation. It's choosing external validation over internal truth. It's going back to the old game you already decided doesn't work. So you practice saying no, without elaborate explanations, without justifying yourself. Just, that doesn't align with where I'm headed. The first few times, this feels arrogant, like you're turning down things you should be grateful for, like you're being difficult. But you're not. You're being discerning. And discernment is how you protect your foundation from being buried under obligations that don't serve you. Aligned action also means being willing to look less successful by conventional measures. Because alignment doesn't always lead to promotion. It doesn't always lead to more money. It doesn't always lead to recognition. Sometimes it leads sideways. Sometimes it leads to a smaller role with greater meaning. Sometimes it leads to less status but more peace. You have to be okay with that. You have to value internal alignment more than external markers of success. This is where most people fail. They do the inner work, they find their values, they identify what matters. But when it comes time to act, they choose the option that looks better on paper over the one that feels better in their gut. They're not ready to pay the cost of alignment. So they rebuild the same misaligned life with slightly different language. Don't do that. Don't waste this opportunity by choosing comfort over truth. Take the aligned action, even when it looks like a step backward. Even when people question it. Even when it doesn't make strategic sense. Because strategic sense, according to your old metrics, doesn't matter anymore. What matters is integrity. Consistency between who you are and what you do. That integrity, that's what creates fulfillment. Not achievement. Not success. Integrity. Now, aligned action doesn't mean passive. It doesn't mean waiting for perfect clarity before moving. It doesn't mean being so careful that you never risk anything. It means moving with intention. Taking risks that align with your values. Being decisive about what serves your foundation and what undermines it. You're building something here. Not a career, exactly. Not a brand. A life that reflects your actual priorities. Work that expresses your actual values. Relationships that honor your actual self. That building requires action. Consistent, intentional, values-driven action. So you start taking it. You start making choices that might not make sense to anyone else, but make perfect sense to you. You start organizing your life around what actually matters instead of what should matter. And slowly, sometimes painfully slowly, things shift. Not dramatically, not overnight, but undeniably. You start to feel more like yourself, more integrated, more at peace with your choices even when they're difficult. You start to notice that the restlessness that drove you to this crisis is fading, not because you achieved more, because you aligned more. You start to experience moments of genuine satisfaction, not the hollow satisfaction of external validation, the deep satisfaction of living in integrity with who you are. That's what action from your new foundation creates, not impressive achievements. Meaningful living, taught. And meaningful living, it turns out, is what you've been searching for all along. Chapter 10. Accept that this is ongoing, not finished. Chapter 10. Accept that this is ongoing, not finished. You want this to be done. You want to figure it out, fix it, and move on. You want a moment when you can say, I've rebuilt my identity. I know who I am now. I'm complete. That moment isn't coming, because identity isn't a destination. It's a practice, and the work of knowing yourself, aligning yourself, becoming yourself. That work doesn't end. You're not building toward a finished self. You're engaging in an ongoing process of becoming. And if you can't accept that, you'll spend your life chasing completion that doesn't exist. This is perhaps the hardest truth of rebuilding identity in your 40s. You thought by this age you'd be settled. You thought you'd have yourself figured out. You thought the questioning would stop. But it doesn't stop. It just gets more refined, more honest, more aligned with reality. The person you are at 45 is not the person you'll be at 50. The values that guide you now will deepen, shift, evolve. The things that feel true today might feel insufficient tomorrow. And that's not failure. That's being alive. Most people can't tolerate this truth. They need to believe they've arrived somewhere. They need the stability of a fixed identity. So they lock themselves into one version of themselves and defend it against all evidence that they're changing. They stop growing. They stop questioning. They stop evolving. And they call that maturity. But it's not maturity. It's stagnation disguised as certainty. Real maturity is accepting that you're never done. That every answer leads to new questions. That every level of understanding reveals new depths to explore. Real maturity is being comfortable with your own incompleteness. You're in your 40s now. If you're lucky, you have decades ahead. And those decades will change you. They'll introduce experiences you can't predict, challenges you can't anticipate, versions of yourself you haven't met yet. You can either resist that change, try to hold on to the identity you're building now as if it's permanent, or you can embrace it as part of the process. Embracing it means accepting a few uncomfortable realities. First, you'll never have complete self-knowledge. There will always be parts of yourself you haven't discovered yet. Parts that only emerge in specific circumstances. Parts that surprise you, contradict your self-image, challenge your assumptions. That's good. That means you're complex. You're not a simple formula. You're a human being with depth that can't be fully mapped. Second, your values will evolve. What matters deeply at 45 might matter differently at 55. Not because you were wrong. Because you've grown. Because life has taught you things that changed your perspective. That evolution doesn't invalidate your current values. It just means values aren't static. They're responsive to lived experience. Third, alignment is a moving target. Just when you get your life aligned with who you are, you'll change slightly. And you'll need to adjust again. This isn't frustrating. This is how it works. You don't align once and stay aligned. You continuously realign as you evolve. It's like steering a boat. You don't point it once and stop adjusting. You constantly make micro-corrections to account for wind, current, changes in conditions. Your life is the same. Continuous micro-corrections toward alignment. Fourth, rebuilding identity in your 40s doesn't solve all your problems. It doesn't make life easy. It doesn't guarantee happiness. It doesn't eliminate uncertainty. It just makes you more yourself. And being more yourself means experiencing life more fully. The joy and the pain, the clarity and the confusion, the peace and the struggle. You're not building toward problem-free existence. You're building toward authentic existence. And authentic existence includes difficulty. But it's difficulty you choose. Difficulty that means something. Difficulty in service of a life that reflects your truth. That's different from the difficulty of misalignment. That difficulty was pointless. This difficulty has purpose. So what does this ongoing nature of identity work mean practically? It means you build practices, not monuments. You don't try to create a fixed identity and protect it. You create practices that keep you connected to yourself as you evolve. Practices like regular reflection. Like checking in with yourself honestly. Like asking, am I still aligned? Do these choices still reflect my values? Am I living with integrity? Those questions don't have permanent answers. They have current answers. And you revisit them consistently. It means you stay curious about yourself, about who you're becoming, about what's emerging from life you're living. You don't assume you know yourself completely. You approach yourself with the same openness you'd approach someone you're getting to know. What interests me right now? What's feeling true? What's feeling forced? What wants to change? Those questions keep you engaged with your own becoming rather than defending a fixed idea of who you should be. It means you give yourself permission to change your mind about what you want, about what matters, about where you're going. Changing your mind isn't weakness. It's responsiveness. It's being willing to admit when something shifts. And things will shift. Your priorities will shift. Your energy will shift. Your sense of what's meaningful will shift. Let it. Don't force yourself to stay committed to decisions that no longer fit just because you made them at a different time. It means you practice self-compassion through the ongoing nature of this work. You don't beat yourself up for not being finished. You don't judge yourself for still having questions. You recognize that you're doing something most people won't do, staying engaged with your own growth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's ongoing, even when there's no end point. That deserves recognition. That deserves gentleness. Finally, accepting the ongoing nature means accepting that you'll never feel completely certain. There will always be ambiguity, always questions, always a sense of still becoming. And that's okay. That's actually healthy, because certainty about who you are can become another prison, another rigid identity you defend instead of live from. Uncertainty keeps you flexible. It keeps you open. It keeps you engaged with reality as it unfolds, rather than insisting reality match your self-concept. So you learn to function in uncertainty, to make decisions without complete clarity, to act while still questioning, to be both grounded in who you are and open to who you're becoming. That balance between knowing yourself and allowing yourself to change, that's the skill you're developing now. And you'll be developing it for the rest of your life. Because this is ongoing, not finished. And that's not a problem to solve. That's reality to accept. You're not broken because you're still figuring it out. You're awake. You're growing. You're refusing to settle for a fixed identity that's too small for your actual complexity. That refusal is what keeps you alive. What keeps you engaged? What keeps you becoming rather than simply being? So accept it. Accept that this work continues. That the questions keep coming. That every answer is temporary and every understanding is incomplete. And then keep going anyway. Keep questioning. Keep aligning. Keep becoming. Not because you'll reach a point where it's done, because the process itself is the point. The process of knowing yourself, of honoring yourself, of living in integrity with yourself as you evolve. That's the work. That's the life. That's what rebuilding identity in your 40s actually means. Not creating a new fixed self, but learning to stay connected to yourself as you continuously become. Chapter 11. Distinguish between who you are and who you've been paid to be. You've been rewarded for being a certain way. And over time, you've confused that rewarded version with your actual self. The market wanted someone strategic. So you became strategic. The organization needed someone decisive. So you became decisive. Your industry valued someone tireless. So you became tireless. And now you can't tell the difference between what's authentically you and what's just highly compensated behavior. This is the most insidious trap of professional success. You get paid to be someone. You get promoted for being someone. You get recognized for being someone. And you start to believe that's who you are. But it's not. It's who you've been paid to be. There's a difference. And until you understand that difference, you'll keep rebuilding the same identity with different labels. Think about the qualities that advanced your career. The ones that got you promoted, that earned respect, that made you valuable to employers. Were those qualities natural to you? Or were they skills you developed because they were rewarded? Most people can't answer honestly because they've worn the professional persona for so long it feels like skin. But here's the test. What parts of your professional self do you drop the moment you're alone? What behaviors do you perform at work but never in private life? What aspects of your work identity feel like a costume you put on rather than a natural expression? Those things, the ones that require performance, those aren't you. Those are your professional adaptation, your survival strategy, your market-optimized self. And there's nothing wrong with having that. You needed it. It got you here. But it becomes a problem when you can't separate it from who you actually are. Because who you actually are might not be what the market rewards. Your authentic self might be less aggressive, less certain, less driven than your professional self, or more emotional, more questioning, more interested in depth than breadth. Your authentic self might want things that don't make strategic sense, might value things that don't advance your career, might need rest when the market demands hustle. And if you've spent decades being rewarded for suppressing that authentic self, you've probably forgotten it exists. So now, in your 40s, when you're trying to rebuild your identity, you keep rebuilding the professional one. The one that got rewarded. Because that's the only one you remember. But that won't solve your crisis. Because your crisis isn't about finding a better professional identity. It's about finding yourself beneath the professional identity. That self, the unpaid one, the unrewarded one, the one that exists when there's no career benefit to being anyone in particular. That's who you need to meet. Most people resist this because it feels like regression, like becoming less, like abandoning their achievements. But you're not abandoning your achievements. You're just refusing to let achievements define you. Here's what this distinction looks like in practice. Your professional self might be an extrovert because networking advances careers. But your actual self might be someone who needs substantial alone time to recharge. You've been performing extroversion so long, you've convinced yourself you're naturally social. But you're not. You're exhausted. And the exhaustion is your authentic self telling you the performance costs too much. Your professional self might be hyper-rational because emotion is seen as weakness in your field. But your actual self might be deeply feeling, intuitive, moved by things that can't be quantified. You've learned to suppress that, to mock it even, to treat your own emotional responses as problems to manage rather than information to honor. But those emotions, they're trying to tell you something. They're trying to show you who you are beneath the professional armor. Your professional self might be competitive because your industry rewards winners. But your actual self might be collaborative, might find more meaning in connection than conquest, might be tired of treating every interaction as a zero-sum game. You've been competing so long, you've forgotten what cooperation feels like. What it feels like to work with someone because you genuinely enjoy them, not because they're useful to your advancement. These gaps between who you've been paid to be and who you actually are, these are why achievement feels hollow. Because you've been succeeding as someone else. You've been getting rewarded for betraying yourself. And no amount of reward compensates for that betrayal. So how do you find yourself beneath the professional persona? You start by noticing the performance. When do you feel like you're acting? When does being professional feel like wearing a mask? When does your work self feel fundamentally different from your home self? Those moments of performance, those are clues. They show you where you've split yourself. Where you've created a public self that doesn't match your private truth. Then you start experimenting with dropping the performance. Not at work necessarily, but in low-stakes situations. With friends, with family, in private. What happens when you stop being strategic? When you stop positioning yourself? When you stop managing impressions? What shows up in that space? Probably something messier than your professional self. Something less polished. Something more real. That's you. Not the impressive version. The actual version. Most people can't tolerate that version because it doesn't look like success. It looks ordinary. Human, tortilla. Flawed, too. But ordinary and human and flawed is what authenticity looks like. Success is what performance looks like. And you can't build an authentic identity on performance. You can only build it on truth. Here's another way to distinguish. What do you want that has no career benefit? What interests you that won't advance you professionally? What would you do if no one was watching, if nothing was at stake, if there was no reward? Those answers, the ones that have no strategic value, those reveal your authentic self. Because your authentic self isn't strategic. It's not optimizing for anything except what feels true, what feels alive, what feels like expression, rather than impression management. For most high achievers, this is terrifying territory, because you've spent your whole life being strategic, every choice calculated for maximum benefit, every interest evaluated for its usefulness. But your authentic self doesn't work that way. It's interested in things for their own sake. It wants things because it wants them, not because they lead somewhere useful. And until you honor that, until you give yourself permission to want things that don't make career sense, you'll keep rebuilding a professional identity instead of discovering your actual one. One more distinction. Who you've been paid to be operates on external validation. Your professional self needs recognition, promotion, acknowledgement to feel valuable. But who you actually are doesn't need that. Your authentic self has internal validation. It knows its worth independent of what others think. That internal validation is what you're missing. That's why achievement stops satisfying. Because you've been feeding external validation to a self that needs internal recognition. You can't fix that with more achievement. You can only fix it by developing a relationship with yourself that doesn't depend on others' opinions. That relationship between you and you, that's what authentic identity is built on. Not on what you've accomplished, not on what you've been rewarded for, but on knowing yourself well enough to trust yourself. So start distinguishing. Start separating who you've been paid to be from who you actually are. Start noticing where you're performing versus where you're being. And then start making small choices based on who you are, not who you've been rewarded for being. Those choices will cost you. They might cost you opportunities. They might cost you people who are attached to your professional persona. They might cost you the comfort of knowing exactly who you're supposed to be. But they'll give you something you haven't had in decades. Yourself. Unperformed. Unrewarded. Real. And that self, that's worth more than any achievement your professional persona ever collected. Chapter 12. Navigate the grief of time you can't reclaim. Chapter 12. Navigate the grief of time you can't reclaim. There's a grief that comes with waking up in your 40s. A grief that no one talks about because it doesn't fit the narrative of empowerment and reinvention. It's the grief of time you spent building the wrong thing. Time you spent being someone you weren't. Time you spent chasing goals that didn't fulfill you. That time? You can't get it back. And you need to grieve it before you can move forward. Because unprocessed grief becomes bitterness. And bitterness will poison everything you try to build next. Most people skip this step. They're so eager to fix things, to move forward, to start fresh, that they refuse to acknowledge what they've lost. They tell themselves it wasn't wasted. That every experience taught them something. That they needed to go through all of it to get here. And maybe that's true. But it's also true that you spent years, maybe decades, living out of alignment. Living for external validation. Living someone else's definition of success. And those years are gone. You don't get a do-over. You don't get to go back to your 30s with the wisdom you have now. That loss is real. And pretending it isn't, rushing past it, trying to focus on the positive, that's just avoiding the pain. And avoided pain doesn't disappear. It metastasizes. So let's talk about what you're actually grieving. You're grieving the person you could have been if you'd known yourself earlier. The paths you might have taken if you'd had the courage to question sooner. The relationships you might have prioritized if you hadn't been so focused on achievement. You're grieving your younger self's vitality, the energy you poured into things that didn't matter, the passion you wasted on goals that turned out to be empty. You're grieving the time you spent performing, trying to impress people you didn't even like, building a reputation that feels like a prison now. Maintaining an image that exhausted you. You're grieving opportunities you missed because you were too busy climbing. Experiences you skipped because they weren't productive. Connections you didn't nurture because they weren't strategic. You're grieving the life you didn't live while you were busy achieving. The spontaneity you sacrificed for structure. The exploration you traded for optimization. The play you abandoned for productivity. All of that is gone. You can't reclaim it. You can't undo the choices you made. You can't go back and choose differently. And that hurts. It should hurt. Because it matters. Most people are so uncomfortable with this grief that they'll do anything to avoid it. They'll rationalize. They'll minimize. They'll insist they don't regret anything. But that's not acceptance. That's avoidance. and avoidance keeps you stuck. Real acceptance means feeling the grief, letting yourself be sad about the time you lost, letting yourself be angry at the system that sold you a definition of success that didn't include fulfillment. Letting yourself acknowledge that yes, you achieved things, but you also sacrificed things. And some of those sacrifices hurt. You don't have to be grateful for every experience. You don't have to find the silver lining. You don't have to make it all mean something. Sometimes things just hurt. And the only way through is feeling it. Here's what this grief looks like when you let yourself feel it. It looks like crying over opportunities you turned down because they weren't impressive enough. Relationships you neglected because they weren't advancing your career. Parts of yourself you abandoned because they weren't useful for achievement. It looks like anger at yourself for taking so long to wake up. At the system for rewarding your self-betrayal. At everyone who told you this was the path to fulfillment when it was really just a path to exhaustion. It looks like regret. Not the kind that paralyzes. The kind that acknowledges reality. You made choices you wish you hadn't. You spent time in ways you wouldn't now. You were someone you're not proud of. That regret is honest. And honesty, even painful honesty, is progress. It also looks like mourning your younger self. The person who was so hungry to prove themselves, who worked so hard, who believed achievement would eventually satisfy. That person was doing their best. They didn't know what you know now. They were operating with limited information and maximum fear. You can have compassion for them while also mourning what they sacrificed, what they didn't know they were giving up. But here's the critical part. This grief has a purpose. It's not just pain. It's information. It's showing you what mattered more than you realized. What you wish you'd prioritized. What you regret neglecting. Those regrets are a nap. They're showing you what to honor going forward. What not to sacrifice again. What deserves protection in whatever you build next. So pay attention to what you're grieving. Not to wallow in it, but to learn from it. If you're grieving missed relationships, that tells you connection needs to be central in your life going forward. If you're grieving lost creativity, that tells you expression needs space now. If you're grieving sacrificed health, that tells you well-being can't be negotiable anymore. Your grief is clarifying your values. It's showing you what actually matters when the achievement is stripped away. That clarity, that's the gift of grief. That's why you have to feel it instead of rushing past it. Most people are afraid that if they start grieving, they'll never stop. They'll fall into depression. They'll become bitter. They'll poison their future with regret. But that's not how grief works. When you actually feel it, when you let it move through you, it resolves. Not completely. Not forever. But enough that you can move forward without carrying it as dead weight. Avoided grief is what becomes bitterness. Felt grief becomes wisdom. So how do you navigate this grief practically? You give it time. You don't rush it. You don't tell yourself to get over it. You don't compare your grief to others and decide yours isn't valid. You let yourself feel sad. You let yourself be angry. You let yourself wish things had been different. You write about it. You talk about it with people who can hold space for it. You acknowledge it instead of performing positivity. You also practice self-compassion. You remind yourself that you were doing your best with what you knew. That you're not the first person to wake up in your 40s and realize you've been living someone else's life. That millions of people are going through this same grief. That it's part of the process of becoming authentic, after decades of performance. You're not alone in this, even though it feels isolating. And you make a commitment. The commitment that while you can't reclaim lost time, you won't waste the time you have left. That every day going forward, you'll choose more consciously. You'll prioritize what actually matters. You'll live from alignment instead of achievement. That commitment doesn't erase the grief, but it gives it meaning. It transforms loss into learning. It ensures that the pain you're feeling now leads to different choices tomorrow. That's how you honor what you've lost. Not by pretending it doesn't hurt, but by using the hurt as fuel to live more authentically going forward. The time you spent out of alignment, that's gone. You can't change it. You can only acknowledge it and commit to not repeating it. And that acknowledgement? That's grief. Necessary, painful, clarifying grief. So feel it. Don't run from it. Don't numb it. Don't rush past it in your eagerness to rebuild. Let it teach you. Let it show you what matters. Let it break your heart open so you can build something more real from the pieces. Because on the other side of this grief is something you haven't had in years. Clarity about what you actually want. Permission to prioritize it. Freedom from the need to justify your choices to people who never understood anyway. That's worth grieving for. Worth feeling the pain to get to the truth. So grieve. Fully. Honestly. And then take what you learned and build something that honors both who you've been and who you're becoming. Chapter 13. Define success on your own terms now. Achievement was never supposed to complete you. It was supposed to show you that completion doesn't exist. There is no arrival. There is no finished. There is only this, the ongoing practice of becoming who you are, while accepting that who you are keeps changing. Your 40s aren't a crisis. They're an awakening to the reality that identity isn't static. That success isn't fulfillment. That achievement is empty without alignment. You've spent decades building a life. Now you're learning to live one. And living requires different skills than building. It requires presence, honesty, flexibility, self-knowledge that evolves rather than calcifies. It requires accepting that you're complex, that you contain contradictions, that you're allowed to change your mind. That who you were is not who you have to remain. Most people never learn these skills. They defend their old identity until it becomes a mausoleum, a monument to who they used to be, not a living expression of who they are. But you're not most people. You're willing to dismantle what doesn't fit, to question what doesn't satisfy, to rebuild from foundations that actually support you. That willingness to choose truth over comfort, alignment over achievement, becoming over being, that's what defines this moment. Not the crisis, the courage. So keep going, keep questioning, keep aligning, keep becoming. Not because it gets easier, because it gets realer. And real, messy, uncertain, ongoing. That's what you've been searching for all along. That's what comes after achievement. That's what happens when you rebuild your identity in your 40s. You become yourself. Finally. Fully. Continuously. And that's enough.